Sean, when you say the 24-hour news cycle and games coverage, you mean talking about stuff like the NGP announcement where journalists are up in the middle of the night halfway around the world from Tokyo reporting on whatever Sony's new PlayStation Portable plans are, or what?
I didn't even see that, dude. We'll have to talk about that as well. You guys can fill me in on like what's going on with that. I did end up seeing a bunch of Twitter commentary about it with the new PSP.
Oh yeah, it was nonstop there during the press conference.
What I basically mean is like, you know, like back in the day, you'd be lucky if there was enough new information to come out to fill up a monthly magazine with, you know, with the usual previews, reviews, and like a small news column and stuff. But the way that it's moved so that you have, you know, all these blogs and like daily sites, and they have to generate new content on a daily basis, and, you know, as much as they possibly can to generate as much traffic as they possibly can. And it gets to the point where it's like, well, there's only so many new releases and there's only so many new things you can say about forthcoming games or about games that just came out. So you get into the part where you're really just reaching for anything you can. I mean, we even had this in a magazine, and it was like, okay, well, you know, This is an opportunity to do, to explore some other aspects and stuff. But I think that, like, when I'm outside of it, when you're inside of it, it's kind of like, you know, you're on this long, tedious train ride, and you're occupying yourself with things to do, like find signs that begin with certain letters, and, you know, or write a novel without using the letter E. But I think, you know, so essentially, I think when you work for one of these blogs or something, you are doing the equivalent of that, you know, like writing a novel without using the letter E, where you're like, okay, this is this sort of academic exercise, you know, what can I possibly do to continue creating content about games, like in this vacuum of it. And it gets to the point where I think as a byproduct, it makes it seem as if there's a whole category of people that see the world exclusively through the lens of gaming. And it's almost like a form of acquired autism, you know, where like nothing makes any kind of sense unless it can be tied back to gaming. Like fucking 7 Degrees or whatever of Kevin Bacon, but of gaming. You see where I'm going with this? I mean, is this familiar to you? You know, you look and
I don't understand. Are you telling me that you don't see everything in the world as being related to video games?
Fuck you.
I know. I don't get it.
Like, I mean,
isn't it?
When I'm out in the world, it's just everything to me about the world is a metaphor for video game.
That doesn't have anything to do with gaming. That doesn't exist. Oh, look at that. What does that have to do with gaming?
Like Charlie Sheen checking into rehab, you know, like the appendix pains or whatever. That's like that's trauma center, right?
I mean, and really nothing really exists in the world if it hasn't been turned into a Minecraft level. Or Little Big Planet or whatever else people are obsessively spending like 1 million hours a week building, you know, odes to classic video games with. Like, if it doesn't exist in Minecraft, it doesn't exist.
Every hip-hop song it doesn't exist unless it's got the fucking 8-bit remix.
There you go.
I like that song because I don't really like the rap music, but I like this one because it's got the familiar sounds of my youth.
Or, oh man, that line about Sonic the Hedgehog is so awesome.
So the reason I'm set off about this is, like, a while ago, Rory had this thing where it looked like he was going to write a column under a pseudonym for GameSpy, like as Kevin Beveridge, and he's the whole thing is basically just a spoof on games, you know, scare quotes journalism. He had this one, it was right after the Cheonan was sunk in South Korea, and the whole thing was like, what does this mean? What can this possibly mean for gaming as we know it? What will it mean for StarCraft tournaments and all this kind of shit? And it was totally offensive, and it was supposed to be, because it was just savagely mocking like the problem when you have that fucking pathology where it's like the world is scrutable only through the reference of games. And like, they'd end up not wanting, for whatever reason, you know, they ended up not wanting it. I thought it was brilliant. I put it on my blog. But and then, you know, funnily, after that, like a few months later, when the artillery exchange happened, then, of course, on a lot of the sites, I saw basically serious versions of that, you know, so that, like, the fucking parody was prophetic. And then the reason I'm talking about it now is, like, just this week, I'm seeing all these, like, game-related stories about what's happening in Egypt right now, and about how people, you know, the poor fucking beleaguered Egyptian citizens can't go to their game site to get the latest news about Dragon Ball Z or something, you know? Like,
that's what happens when they take your internet away. You can't obsessively follow your favorite games. Yeah, I don't know. In general, like I've been sort of disturbed on Twitter about the sort of way that people get into international crises, especially Americans, but like Westerners in particular. On Twitter, like everything has become about Egypt, and at first it's like, yeah, I really care about what's going on, and this is crazy, and I'm seeing these pictures, and it's like, wow. But then it starts to become this kind of disaster porn. It's like we live in a very stable world where we have serious political disagreements that the worst thing that ever happens is you have to listen to fucking Sarah Palin, you know? But like there are people rioting in the streets and stuff, and we get really into it. We're getting like vicarious sort of thrills about seeing cars explode and knowing that like real tragedy in the world happens that doesn't involve Snooki. You know, but
and more than that too.
And the
I think
attraction to a cause. Go on, Jeff.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I just think it gets into this weird kind of thing where like if you're on Twitter, say you're now somehow obliged to comment on this de rigueur topic of international news, even though you probably know little to nothing about what's actually going on over there, but it's sort of like a save the whales kind of moment.
Well, it's the same thing. It's
Egypt.
like they don't have internet. Like before, it's like who cares? All these years, there's no Twitter activity whatsoever about the shitty autocratic regime there. And then or conversely, in the back of their mind, maybe people are just like, well, at least the Muslim Brotherhood's not running it, and they're not aligning themselves with
You're right.
But
I mean, I don't mind seeing Twitter updates.
They can't get on the net, and it's like, oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeff, finish your thought.
Well, it's just I get annoyed when I see my Twitter feed cluttered by gaming personalities making some obligatory retweet or comment on Egypt. I mean, it's not that. I mean, okay, the sentiment is fine, but actually, like, I don't need this from you. Like, I've got my news sources that I can follow, that I somewhat trust as much as we trust any media. But I'm having somebody from this random game site retweeting some made up JPEG about showing whatever, a sphinx with a muzzle on it. What does that do for me?
Did you really see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say that what's interesting to loop it back to games, because as an event of global importance, it does have to relate to games in some way. Like the whole thing about 6 Days in Fallujah, like the Medal of Honor controversy and whatever. Part of it makes me wonder if there's something assumed to be inherently trivializing about depicting serious events in games, and I'm wondering if there's something that can be inherently trivializing about filtering an event like this through Twitter, right? Like where, you're limited to 140 characters, right? It's the politics of the situation are not widely known. Twitter has sort of like one of its functions is sort of as the water cooler, right? And so kind of the well-meaning but relatively inane conversation that you or I might have with a colleague at the office that the world would never see is now broadcast.
Right.
And so it gets mushed up with Bieber fever and Andy Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg showing up on SNL and the Mechanic opening, and is the Social Network going to win Best Picture? But Sean, going back to what you were saying, though, I mean, how much does it bother you when you see like game journalists trying to find connections between the industry they're covering and global events, and how much do you sort of feel like it's a fumbling towards just trying to ground what it is they do?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the threat of like some degree of hypocrisy, because when we did GFW, we would routinely each month would run a story, usually written by Ed Halter, about gaming in other parts of the world. But the difference that I see there would be like, so for example, like there was a story called Islamo Gaming that we ran, and what that offered was essentially a survey course on the way that games are consumed and created in another part of the world. And I felt that when you read it, I mean, there was like, because it was a survey, there was an awful lot of information about a wide variety of elements of gaming within that certain region, as opposed to, here's an entire story just trying to say, is there some connection at all with what's going on in Egypt right now?
We weren't we weren't reactively glomming onto some event just to be kind of part of the daily zeitgeist.
Exactly.
This was like a story that took place outside of the news.
So that's I'm totally aware of the. I think it's you'd have to look at it on a case by case study. Surely someone could do something, but in these matters, everything I've seen so far has just been a real stretch. I don't even want to get into trouble by getting into specifics. This is my problem. And another thing this week too. God, I better not even say it. I gotta watch myself. Let's talk about Dead Space 2, guys. I'm really enjoying that.